Okay, good evening, everybody. It's Wednesday night. It means Halacha and Tanya. So we're in the middle of Muktzeh, and last time we were discussing what's called Muktzeh Machmasatzmei. It's just Muktzeh because it's Muktzeh. It's not a vessel. Muktzeh Machmas Gufi, it's called. A Muktzeh because it is not something we discussed. Sand, dead bodies, by the way. Branches, sticks, money, currency, all those are real muktzeh. You can't move them for any reason whatsoever. Okay, now, candles, your regular Shabbos candles that are not being lit, those are definitely muktzeh. Some people say it's completely muktzeh. It's not a keli, it's not a usable thing. Many people say, no, it's keli shemalachte le'isr. It's a vessel's primary use is for something forbidden. The difference between the two, again, if you can move it if you need the place, or if it's totally muktzeh, even if you need the place, you're not allowed to move it. So again, all these things is better not to move at all, even though technically, according to the Alter Rebbe, would have a din of keli shemalachte le'isr, that you would be allowed to move it if you need the place, or you want to use it for something permissible. In other words, what happens if by mistake somebody left a candle on the dining room table, and now you want to set the table Friday night or Shabbos day, and there's a candle there. So if it would be completely muktzeh, you wouldn't be allowed to move the candle for anything. If you hold this keli shemalachte le'isr, its primary use, because it is a usable thing according to many opinions. So according to the Alter Rebbe, you would be allowed to move it if you need the place or you want to do something permissible with it. The same thing would apply, for instance, to a bar of soap. Now, you have different types of soap. A bar of soap, a bar is forbidden to use on Shabbos. Why is the bar forbidden to use on Shabbos? Because it's called halachic. You're smoothing out the bar. Okay? So a bar of soap is forbidden to use on Shabbos. Stick deodorant is forbidden to use on Shabbos, because when you put it on, you're smoothing it out, which is one of the lamitas malachos on Shabbos. So now the question is, a bar of soap or a stick deodorant, which was not allowed to be used on Shabbos, is that total muktzeh, which many opinions say it's total muktzeh. Other opinions say, no, it's keli shemalachte le'isr. Its primary use is for something which is forbidden. A soap bar is used to wash yourself, which in that case would be forbidden on Shabbos because it's a bar of soap. And other people are more lenient. So in these things, it's better if somebody could avoid beforehand and make sure before Shabbos that the soap is not around and the candles are not around. And generally, people should be checking the home, the house, the tables, the places that you're going to be using, and make sure there's nothing muktzeh there. Now, concerning liquid soap is an argument in halacha if you're allowed to use it or not. Many poskim hold you're not allowed to use liquid soap on Shabbos because you're creating bubbles. We hold, say, so Shulchan holds, the Chassidish poskim, most of them hold that you are allowed to use liquid soap on Shabbos. The only thing with liquid soap, what you need to be careful with is, a lot of the liquid soaps, I'm not talking about the dishwashing detergent. The dishwashing detergent is very liquidy. But some of the hand soaps that, push out of a container, a lot of them are creamy. And if they're creamy, you're not allowed to use that as it is on Shabbos. We learned if you mix water with it and you dilute it, so then you could use it. So again, if you hold you're not allowed to use liquid soap at all on Shabbos, then liquid soap is muktzeh. If you hold you're allowed to use liquid soap on Shabbos, even if it's thicker, but because you could dilute it on Shabbos, it would be done in a permissible way. So then, according to those opinions, liquid soap, and that's the way we paskin, is not muktzeh on Shabbos, and you would be allowed to use it also. The same thing applies to toothpaste. Toothpaste you're not allowed to use in Shabbos, unless it's liquid toothpaste. but regular toothpaste is not allowed to be used on Shabbos. So therefore, if you have a tube of toothpaste, according to certain opinions, it's completely muktzeh. According to other opinions, it's keli shemalach del isser, and people should be careful. Another interesting din that a lot of people are unaware of, the Alter Rebbe writes also, a blank piece of paper is muktzeh, unless if it was designated for a usage before Shabbos. But a regular piece of paper, blank sheets of paper, or a blank pad, or things like that, are muktzeh on Shabbos. Because a piece of paper is not a keli. It's a nothing. If it's designated, let's say before Shabbos, you designated it as a bookmark, then like anything else, even a rock we learned, if you designate it before Shabbos, then it's not muktzeh because you designated it. So people should be careful. Now, what happens if there's writing on a piece of paper? Any book basically is a piece of paper with writing on it. So again, we're going to go more details later on when he gets to those dinim here. But generally, the bottom line is like this. If it's a paper you're allowed to read on Shabbos, it's not muktzeh. If it's a piece of paper you're not allowed to read on Shabbos, then the paper is totally muktzeh. You can't move it for any reason whatsoever. Including in that thing, we're going to learn more details later. But what type of papers are not allowed to be read on Shabbos? Anything, by the way, most papers are not allowed to be read on Shabbos. But let's just talk a few minor details. Anything that has any business connection whatsoever, meaning bills, you get a bill in the mail, it's muktzeh. Contracts, anything connected to business is completely muktzeh. Therefore, a bill is completely muktzeh on Shabbos, because even though there's writing on the blank piece of paper, it's not blank, there's writing on it, but it's a writing you're not allowed to read. If it's a writing you're not allowed to read, then it's muktzeh. Now, what happens if somebody has a notebook, okay, and the first few pages are empty, or in the middle it's empty, and you want to get to the place that you need to read, but there's blank pages in the middle. So then everybody says that's not considered a problem. Why? Because it's all bound into one book. And because it's bound into one book or a notebook that binds it all together, so then it's considered one book. So therefore, because the papers in it are allowed to be read, so therefore they're not muktzeh. And if they're not muktzeh, so then the whole folder therefore is not muktzeh. But if it's papers that you can't read on Shabbos, it's total muktzeh. Then you have another thing. Sometimes you have very expensive writing paper. Very expensive stationery, that you would only use for certain occasions. Nobody's going to make a paper airplane out of an expensive piece of stationery or calligraphy paper, whatever it is. That's an additional level of muktzeh. It's called Muktzeh Machmas Chisarin Kis, that we learned it's so expensive, you're not going to use it for anything but what it's made to use for, which is to write on, which is forbidden on Shabbos. In that case, it's completely muktzeh. You can't move it for any reason whatsoever. Bricks, cinder blocks, okay, are muktzeh because it's made for construction. Now, years ago in the time of the Gemara talks about people used to take cinder blocks and use it either for a stool to sit on. So again, because those were designated before Shabbos, generally speaking, to sit on, there's a lot of stories that people were on Shabbos, they had a class, so they were bringing the cinder blocks that the Amiroim said they can move because they were designated for seating. So then they lose the muktzeh status. Or fixtures, wallpaper, all those types of things are completely muktzeh on Shabbos. Now, any growing plant, that means a plant that's still connected to a pot or connected to the ground, is completely Muktzeh on Shabbos. Cut flowers are not Muktzeh on Shabbos. But a plant that's in a vase or in a pottery, that is completely Muktzeh on Shabbos. You're not allowed to move it for any reason whatsoever. Okay? Now we're going to move on to the same concept of Muktzeh, but a different category of Muktzeh. And that is when something was usable, it was a keli, it was a utensil, and it wasn't Muktzeh. Now it broke. It broke before Shabbos, or it broke, let's say, on Shabbos. So now you have a lot of dinim. When is the broken pieces Muktzeh, and when are the broken pieces not Muktzeh? If the broken pieces can still be used, not necessarily for the original purpose of what they were made lechatchila, but they're still usable for a certain thing. I'll give you an example. You have a shoelace. Okay, a shoelace was made to put into shoes, tie shoes. By the way, you're not allowed to put in a shoelace on Shabbos anyway, but that's not for now. But a shoelace is not muktzeh because it's a shoelace, it's tying the shoe. What happens if the shoelace rips in half? So now it's not usable as a shoelace anymore because it's not long enough. But it's still used to tie something. It's still usable. Not necessarily the same usage it was before it broke. So then the din is, it wouldn't be muktzeh. Okay? Now, there's three categories. Number one, the pieces are completely unusable. Something breaks and it's not usable at all. That is completely muktzeh on Shabbos. So let me give you a very simple example. You have a glass, you're carrying a glass on Shabbos to the table. The glass falls out of your hand and shatters on the floor. It breaks on the floor. That glass obviously is not usable for a glass anymore. It's not usable for anything anymore. What are you going to do with a broken glass? So technically, that glass is the broken glass is completely muktzeh. Is completely muktzeh. But, so you're not allowed to move it. But if it fell on the floor and somebody might get hurt, or it fell on the table and there's broken glass on the table and somebody might not realize and put their hand and cut their hand, so then the law of muktzeh doesn't apply. Even though in essence it's muktzeh. It's muktzeh because it's not usable. And if it's not usable, not only it's not as the original use, it's not usable for any use. So then it's completely muktzeh. But if it's in a dangerous, I don't mean life endangering situation. If it's in a place where somebody can get hurt, then you're allowed to take it and throw it out immediately. A next thing is if the pieces are usable as before. For instance, you have a cutting board. You have a cutting board and the board cracks on Shabbos. Okay, so now it's in half. Okay, it's not that you can't use it as the same cutting board as before because it's much smaller. But you can use it for a smaller piece of meat to cut. It's still usable as a cutting board. It's still usable as the original usage of it was. So then it's not muktzeh. Okay? Because it's the same thing as the original usage. Now, the third category we mentioned, it's usable, but not like it was on Shabbos. So let me give you a very common thing. Somebody's glasses break on Shabbos. Somebody's glasses break on Shabbos. If the glasses, I'm talking about glasses for your eyes, if they're still usable, then they're not muktzeh. If they're not usable, they're completely muktzeh. For instance, if the temple, this side, the temple of a glass breaks, technically it's still usable. People wear the glasses with one temple only. I mean, it's not secure as two temples, but it's still usable. So then it wouldn't be muktzeh. But if it cracks in half, it's completely muktzeh. You can't use it for anything. It's not usable. So even if it breaks on Shabbos, it's completely muktzeh. You can't even move it. You have to just leave it. You can move it with, you can move it with your foot. You can move it with your elbow. You can move it in a different way, but you wouldn't be allowed to do it. Now, if you learn in Gemara, the Gemara will speak about broken shards. The vessel broke, and they're like little pieces. So in the Gemara it says they're not muktzeh. Why are they muktzeh? Because in the time of the Gemara, when a pottery broke, they would use the little pieces to cover bottles with it. They would use it actually as a bottle cover. The Gemara says. They would use it to cover a bottle. In fact, there's an interesting question in the Gemara. You find a document in the street, a loan document. You don't know, is it the borrowers or the lenders who lost it, and now if you give it back to the wrong person, they might collect or not collect, the whole discussion in the Gemara. So then the Gemara is discussing, okay, it's not valid anyway, but who do you give it back to? You give it back to the lender or the borrower. So the Gemara asks, who cares? It's a worthless document. Why do you care who you're giving it back to? So the Gemara says, to use as a bottle cover. So that question is, who gets the paper to use as a bottle cover? So in the time of the Gemara, they would use paper as bottle covers. They would use broken pieces of shards of utensils. They would use it as bottle covers. They had nothing else. Isn't that what we have today? So then in those cases, there wouldn't be muktzeh. But nowadays, halacha says we don't use those things. When a vessel breaks, a dish breaks, you don't use it for anything, you throw it out. So if today a broken utensil is not used for any use whatsoever, so then it's completely muktzeh and you can't do anything with it. You can't move it for any reason whatsoever. Again, you can move it with your hand, your elbow, your foot, but just to get it out of the way. Now, what happens if a garment rips? Garment clothing rips. Now, let's say you can't fix it, but nevertheless, the material is still usable. Halacha says the material is still usable. Why is the music? Because people would do it even today. What do people do with old undershirts or old clothing? Many times they used it as dust shmatas, rags. So then the halacha says, as long as it's gimel tvachim by gimel tvachim, that's between 10 and 12 inches by 10 and 12 inches. As long as a garment is that size, let's say a foot by a foot, that's less. Let's say 10 by 10 or 11 by 11 inches, it's usable as a shmata or a rag or whatever, and therefore it's not muktzeh. But if the person, let's say before Shabbos, it ripped smaller than 10 by 10, it ripped into 5 by 5. The din is, if the person designated it before Shabbos for a particular usage, I'll give you an example. He designated it to use as a glass cleaner, to clean his glasses. So then it wouldn't be muktzeh, because again, before Shabbos, he designated it as something usable. So again, this is not difficult Kabbalah to understand. If it's not, something broke and it's not usable at all, it's muktzeh. If it's still usable, not necessarily the first thing, it's not muktzeh. Even if it breaks in Shabbos, it's not muktzeh. But if it's not usable. If it's original use, then for sure it's not muktzeh. Then it's not a problem at all. Okay, now what happens, and this is more common than you think it might be. Something broke or ripped, and before Shabbos, the owner threw it into the garbage. He discarded it. The fact, even though technically it's still usable for something, but it broke. Okay. So therefore, it becomes muktzeh just by the intention and action of the person of throwing it out, because it's broken. In other words, like this: what happens if somebody took a plate that's not broken, a glass that's not broken, and he doesn't want to use it anymore, so he throws it into the garbage before Shabbos. Then on Shabbos, he realizes, no, he can still use it for something. Because it wasn't broken, the fact that he threw it out doesn't mean it's not a keli anymore. It's a usable, viable keli. Or, I mean, I'm just giving this halacha. I don't know if people should be doing this. Let's say you're allowed to carry, whatever, and Shabbos in the situation. And you walk by somebody's garbage, and you see they threw away a beautiful plate, a beautiful glass. Am I allowed to take that out of the garbage? If I can carry, am I allowed to take that out of the garbage on Shabbos, or is it muktzeh because the owner threw it away? The answer is it's not muktzeh because it's an entire vessel. It's a whole thing. The fact that he threw it away means he doesn't want it, but it's not. It's still usable, as it was originally. It didn't break. Or I'll give you another example. There's a little chipped glass, tiny chip. So a lot of people throw it out. Then they realize, no, we still need it. Oh, we'll be careful, whatever. So then it's not muktzeh because it's complete. What happens though if it's a broken utensil and the guy threw it out before Shabbos? Then the fact that he threw it out before Shabbos, it remains muktzeh. He cannot change his mind on Shabbos. He can wait until after Shabbos and then take it out of the garbage. But on Shabbos, he can't. What happens, though, if something broke on Shabbos and he threw it out on Shabbos? Then he could change his mind and take it out of the garbage as long as it's usable for a normal usage. Then he would be allowed to change his mind, because he didn't throw it out before Shabbos. And this Alter Rebbe says clearly, if he threw it out, if it broke on Shabbos and he threw it out on Shabbos, then it's not real muktzeh, because when Shabbos began, it wasn't muktzeh. The person threw it out on Shabbos, but now you can unchange his mind. If he threw a broken utensil out before Shabbos, then when Shabbos began, it was completely muktzeh. And then it stays muktzeh forever. Okay. Next is like this. This could also be a little bit of a practical level. And that is, what happens if your door detaches from the wall on Shabbos? Or you have a door handle, and all of a sudden on Shabbos, you're opening the door and the handle falls off. That things are completely muktzeh, because it's not a utensil, it's part of the house, and therefore it doesn't have the status as a utensil. So detached doors, by the way, it's not only a door, built-in bookcase, closet, cabinet, anything which is connected to the ground and something comes off, whether it's the door, the handle, the whatever, the knob, on Shabbos, they're completely muktzeh, because they weren't a keli, and therefore they remain muktzeh. Okay, that they will leave. Now, if somebody wants to use this door that fell off for a different thing, Okay, let's leave that. Let's do one more halacha, which is very, very practical with this din. A button falls off on Shabbos. That's more likely than a door falling off. A button falls off on Shabbos. Is the button muktzeh or not? Okay. Some poskim hold that a button is completely muktzeh, even if you're planning to put it back on. And poskim right, you should be strict like that opinion. There are different opinions that are makel, whatever. There's a lot written on this issue of buttons. But the bottom line is, a person, if a button falls off from a garment and they don't want to lose it, they can kick it off to the side a little bit. If it's not in the street, you can kick it less than 6 feet, but to a, so to speak, a safe place. You can't kick it more than 6 feet because then you're carrying on Shabbos. But you can move it a little with an elbow with it, but the button itself remains muktzeh. Some people, some poskim can differentiate. If you're planning to resew it, it's not muktzeh. If you're not planning to resew it, it is muktzeh. Some poskim can differentiate between a unique button, you know, a special type of a button, not a regular button on your shirt or on a suit, you know, a special button, let's say a designer button. So many poskim hold it's not muktzeh because you're planning to put it back, so it never really, it's still part of the garment. And some poskim say, but if it's a regular button, so you can get them the dime a dozen. So it's not something great. You have plenty of those buttons anyway. So you don't care about this button. So the button is considered a broken keli because the button fell off from where it's sewed. And some poskim hold, b'chlal, a button is not called a keli. So while it's connected to the garment, it's bottled to the garment. So it's part of the garment. So it's not muktzeh. Once it falls off the garment, according to many, many poskim, it's considered not a keli and is completely muktzeh. Now, for instance, if a shoe breaks, now nowadays it's not shaykh to break as much as it was in the olden days. But again, if the shoe is broken and it's not usable for any usage whatsoever, it's completely muktzeh. If you could still wear it, I'll give you an example. The shoelace tore. Okay, so now technically it's not so comfortable to use the shoe because it can be very loose. But you can technically still wear the shoe. It's still wearable. So then the shoe wouldn't be muktzeh. If for whatever reason, I'll give you another example. It once happened to me on Yom Kippur, walking home from the shul. The whole bottom of the shoe fell off. The whole, was glued on the sole of the Yom Kippur shoes, okay? But the whole bottom of the shoe fell off. So that shoe is not wearable. What other usages are you going to have from it? Who knows? But in that case, the shoe would be completely muktzeh. You can wear it until you get home because you're wearing it. It's with your feet. You're not. But again, a shoe that breaks that's not usable becomes completely muktzeh. Okay, we're going to stop here. We're going to go to Tanya.